Welcome to The Paul Spradley Show, a show dedicated to real strategies from real people practicing real leadership in diverse and inclusive cultures. And now here's your host, CEO of the diversity training firm, the Care-Based Leadership Collaborative, Dr. Paul David Spradley. Welcome to Season 1 of The Paul Spradley Show, Living Care-Based Leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Spradley, and I am excited about who our guest is today. He is a scholar in his own right. Mr. EvansMoore is coming to us today and has just an incredible story. Your background is amazing. I think the things that you're doing in the community is fantastic. You are someone who's gone from a person who's been in college to being in gangs to being a national organizer. And so your resume is very impressive. It's very impressive. But why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about who you are? What are you currently doing right now?
So my name is EvansMoore. I am the Pennsylvania Regional Organizer for FAM in Pittsburgh.
Does FAM stand for something?
FAM used to stand for Families Against Mandatory Minimums, but we've gone the way of most organizations, and now we're just FAM because the work has shifted so much. We work on prison reform, and we work on sentencing policies. We work on prison policies, and we work on medical and geriatric parole, as well as helping people to get pardon and things of that nature. And so what we do is we kind of work on the continuum of the criminal justice system, from what it looks like before you enter the system, right, your sentencing and all the process that you deal with on that end, how you're handled while you're actually in prison. In Florida and in Texas, we were having issues with no AC and no not good amenities in the prisons, and people were actually dying from the heat. So dealing with issues like that.
How many people bring that up, right? Like, because there'll be people that will say things like, "It's prison. They shouldn't have air conditioning. They shouldn't have good food." Like, what is your response to that, right? When people are that might think like that.
So I have the awesome luxury of working with families who have justice-involved individuals, people who are incarcerated or dealing with community supervision. And so the perspective that I get to hear and see every day is a lot different than, folks who don't have someone who is dealing with the prison system. And so the stories that I hear are a lot different. And that narrative is out there, right? You do the crime, you do the time. What's interesting about that narrative is that primarily comes from people who live in safe communities.
Right.
I live in a safe community and I'm tough on crime. When the reality is, folks who come from the most impacted zip codes, who have the higher rates of incarcerated individuals in those zip codes, those are the folks that are really pushing for criminal justice reform because they see the everyday impact on the community and their families. And so they want to change. They don't think that the way the criminal justice system is working for us, nor do they think that it contributes to public safety in any real way.
How have families communicated with you that the system as it is right now is hurting our family? It's hurting this individual and it's hurting our family. How have they communicated? What kind of stories have they shared with you?
There's one story in particular that I'll live with for the rest of my life. There's a young man named Ricky Turner. Ricky Turner lived in Virginia. He was from Utah. His family's from Utah. Ricky Turner was a mental health tech. He worked with autistic children. Really sweet guy, good guy. He had a nephew who was serving in Iraq and was lost during the conflict. And he took that hard. And the way that he coped with that was he turned to methamphetamines. And so he became a meth addict. And during an FBI raid in Virginia, they swept up about 20 people in a meth house. Now, he's an addict. He was in there using, he was not selling, he was not contributing to the criminal enterprise in any way other than consuming. And what people don't realize is that when the FBI raids a home or raids a drug business, all the individuals that they gather up have a responsibility for all of the drugs. So they don't divvy it up and say, you're responsible for this amount, you're responsible for this amount. They They put it all in mass, and they hit everybody with that charge. Ricky was the only one who did not go, that didn't take a plea bargain. He said, listen, I'm an addict. You know, I wasn't involved in a criminal enterprise. I'll go to trial. I'll be okay. Well, Ricky ended up with 40 years federal time. He got a mandatory minimum sentence of 40 years, and because his sentence carried so much weight, now he's a first-time offender, and because his sentence carried so much time, he was sentenced to a federal supermax in Florence, Colorado.
Wow.
Florence, Colorado. Supermax is run by gangs.
And a supermax is the kind of...
That's where Charles Manson, folks of that level, that's where El Chapo is at.
So there's supermax, and then there's like
there's maximum security,
minimum security,
medium security, minimal security.
Okay, so he's in the supermax.
He's in the supermax.
Wow.
First-time offender, meth addict. The white supremacist gangs were after him. He didn't want to join a white supremacist gang. And so our organization wrote to the senator, we wrote to the Bureau of Prisons, and we tried to get him moved, and with no help. And about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we got the message that Ricky was killed by the gangs. And so those are the kinds of stories that families, you know, have to deal with. And his sister, Mandy Turner, who is an advocate of ours, predicted at our annual conference, she was sharing Ricky's story, and she was sharing the letters that he was writing home, and she actually predicted that he wasn't going to make it.
Oh my goodness. And so first of all, the way that you humanized Ricky is something that I think people struggle with. Like, I think that people struggle with the idea of he is because they'll say he's a meth head.
Right.
Right? They won't say that he became addicted to meth.
Right.
Right? Like they'll just say that that's who he is.
Right.
And that is who he is defined as, right? And so then becomes that, well, then just let him rot because he's a meth head, so because he's bad, he should be in a bad place.
Right.
But you're saying that Ricky, the Ricky that you understood, the Ricky who was who was connected to this family, was a brother, was a son.
That's right.
Who cared for people with disabilities.
That's right.
Who went through a tough spell in his life, which all of us do, and his release in that tough period was drugs.
That's right.
An addictive drug. So he stayed in this space because it once it gets a hold of you, right? Like, and so
it's a spiral, right?
It's a spiral.
That's right.
But he's a person.
He's a human being, right? And that's the thing that we forget about the folks that we have the responsibility of overseeing in these institutions of correction. These are human beings. You know, I have a colleague, Celeste Trusty, who is our state policy director. She does this exercise where she'll ask everybody in the room to close your eyes and think of the worst thing that you did. And imagine being judged for the rest of your life for that thing. You know, usually the room goes completely silent and people are kind of like, And so what we're doing with our prison system is that we're literally condemning people for the rest of their life for the worst moment in their life, and not having any mercy, not having any sense that we can reform or correct these behaviors. We're just warehousing and throwing people away.
Wow. We're throwing bad people away.
That's right.
And I've heard even locally there's some social justice activists that'll say things like, listen, understand the action, but don't throw the person away.
Don't throw the person away, right?
Man, so how did you get to, have you always been this compassionate towards people? Like, and so clearly your gifts have made way for you, right? Like you've been working on the national stage in multiple spaces. Have you always understood relationships like this, or was this something that developed over time? You
know, that's a great question. And when I reflect on this question, I remember there was an organization here in Pittsburgh called Community Against Racism.
Okay.
Back in the late 70s, early 80s. My mom and dad was a part of that organization. I can remember being in a stroller at rallies with balloons and signs. My mom was a union shop steward. My dad was one of the founding board members of the Bloomfield-Garfield Corporation. And so I didn't realize until later on in my adult life that this stuff was ingrained in me at a very early age. Even when I would be in elementary school, you know, I would go and they would segregate children with learning disabilities from, we didn't have these inclusive classrooms. And so the other children would be in different classrooms. I would always kind of, you know, migrate and play with those children on the playground and but I've always been relational in that way.
People will say, I was talking with a mother on Sunday earlier this week, and she was saying, I don't know what it is, but my kids are just really confident. Like, it's just innate, but it's not innate. Like,
it's not innate.
People have these really strong personal characteristics. They're not innate. Like, it's been taught to you, right?
It's been taught, that's right.
And so we, in an earlier podcast, we talked about with another guest, the idea of things being taught to you in this space. And so you were taught, you were conditioned to love people, even if you didn't realize what that was.
What it was, right?
So, and then, so you navigate it through life. Talk about, because you have such an amazing backstory, maybe the years of, 14 to 21, like what happened during that period?
Oh, those are crazy times. When my mom talks about that period of my life, she tells people I took a leave of absence from my mind. So at 14, I decided as a middle school student, my mom was a single mom at the time. Her and my dad were not together at the time. They got back together, which is another story, but they weren't together at the time. My mom was a single mom, launched into the workforce unexpectedly when I was in middle school. And so during my last year in middle school, I decided that I wanted to go to Perry Traditional Academy. Okay. It was a science and math academy. And so I enrolled myself in this magnet program. And so I went to Perry and I found they had an excellent football program.
Not better than Brashear's, because that's where I went to school. So I'm just.
Well, I have a state championship ring, so.
I went to the playoffs.
Yeah.
Our team went to the playoffs.
I mean, those were the years where it was like Brashear or Perry.
Right.
And every once in a while, like Westinghouse or Peabody would sneak in. But for a long time, it was like Brashear and Perry. Brashear did go to the state championship the year before.
Okay.
They didn't win.
We came in second.
Y'all were state runner-up. We were the first city league team to win the state championship, so I'm going to just let that stand there.
So you had a great academic and clearly a great football experience as well, too.
Oh, man. Perry, when part of my work in education reform harkens back to my days at Perry. We had teachers that invested real energy, emotion, resources in us. I mean, we had teachers that took time out to pull us aside and talk to us. We had teachers that would, explore other parts of our lives, what was going on beyond the school bell. Coach Franklin, Coach Catanese, we had Mr. Walsh, Mr. Reese. I mean, there were just a ton of educators who really loved on us and took their craft of teaching very seriously. My algebra teacher, Mr. Bolus, made math so simple for everybody. And I just remember when I graduated, about 80% of my class went on to post-secondary education in some shape or form.
That's
Another
amazing.
5% went on to like trade schools and things like that. And we had vocational training at our school, so we had people go straight into carpentry and drywalling and painting straight out of high school. So my graduating class was extremely socially mobile when we graduated from high school, and definitely prepared to go to the next level. And so I kind of look back to those days and think, how can we get that kind of energy back? But then there was this attitude ingrained in us through the athletic programs that two things. Number one, you're not an individual, you need a team. And number two, if you really buy into a collective vision, you can't be stopped. And so those attitudes were ingrained in us, in that culture. And we have a lot of people who graduated with me or the classes around my class that are doing some exceptional things in the city and in the country.
Wow. So what happened after that? So you were primed and ready to go, right? So you it sounds like 80% of your class went to college. Did you have a chance to go to college? Or
I did.
Okay.
I went to the University of Pittsburgh for a
Okay.
year, and I met my first wife there. We got pregnant with my oldest son, and at that point, I decided that I needed to take care of my child, and so I dropped out of college. And we moved to Erie for a while. I moved to Erie. I lived in Erie for about a year. And then in '93, I came back to Pittsburgh. And that was like dead smack in the middle of gang activity in my neighborhood particularly.
And which neighborhood did you come
Garfield.
back? So in the 90s, and I was on the back end of that in my school, like the Bloods and the Crips were huge, right? Like in Pittsburgh, and there was these different territories. So you didn't go in, and you couldn't wear a red shirt in certain neighborhoods, and you couldn't wear a blue shirt in other neighborhoods.
That's right.
And I've had friends that were beat badly for just wearing the wrong color in the wrong neighborhood.
Unless they weren't shot.
Unless they weren't shot or killed, right? Like
Right.
there's one gang that wore black, right? And so you had to know which neighborhood had different colors, because that was a big thing in
Huge.
91 all the way up to about 2000.
Yeah.
2001, the gangs were very big in Pittsburgh. And
Very
so
big.
you came back to that.
Yep, I came back to that. Got involved in some things that I knew better than to get involved with, and in order to do that, I had to be gang affiliated, and so I participated in that lifestyle from about '93 to about '96. I moved back to Erie for a couple of more years, where I got into ministry. I had a pastor fish me out the street. I started doing street evangelism. I thought, big tough guy, the street team is going out. I'll go out with the street team to protect them. And I ended up getting a bug, talking to people about, the possibilities for their lives and impacting, in that relational side of me kicked back in. Because you go into communities and you go into situations and you go into neighborhoods and you see people facing some of the worst challenges that we face as human beings, and all I could ever see is potential. And when I see human beings, I can only visualize potential. And so I just caught the bug. I started doing prison ministry. We're going to prison ministry, and then something strange happened. My pastor, Bishop Jesse Gavin, packed me up and sent me to Chicago for 7 days. And he sent me to a residential training that President Obama attended.
Wow.
And I was trained by 2 of the 3 people that trained President Obama to organize. And I became a community organizer. I came back to Erie, and we did some things in Erie, but my eye was always on Pittsburgh because, I did a lot of damage in Pittsburgh. I participated in some things that contributed to the negative, development in my community. And so I wanted to come back and do some positive things. And so we started an organization called the Pittsburgh Interfaith Impact Network. I was the founding executive director for PEN, and I worked for PEN from 2001 until about 2008. In 2008, I was recruited by Obama for America to be their faith outreach director, regional faith outreach director in Western Pennsylvania.
Right.
And so we focused on securing the black vote, making sure that the vote margins were good in the black community through working with the black church, but we also had a major Catholic strategy to make sure that we turned out a good Catholic vote for that election. Needless to say, we were pretty successful in Western Pennsylvania specifically. Go ahead.
Well, no, so there's so much good stuff, man. So like you just breezed from '93 to 2003.
Okay.
And I don't want to harp in this
That's
space,
okay.
but like I think the transition is really critical, right? Like, so there was something that happened for you. First of all, the fact that you're alive is a blessing, because I have friends.
Yes, sir.
I can count about 5 people that I went to high school with that did not make it out of high school because of gang activity.
Yes, sir.
Right? Like were shot.
Yeah.
And violently.
Yeah.
And so you were in the gang for 3 years. Did you learn anything about yourself while you're in that? Did you learn about, because you still had this upbringing of like, I care about people. I'm doing this thing right now. It's an ends to a mean, but like, how were you growing while you were in that space into the person that you are now?
Incredible question. What people don't really understand about gangs is they fill a void. We are supposed to be in community. We're supposed to be connected with one another. We're supposed to have social structure and social scaffolding around us. When we don't have that, other things fill that void. For me, it was being gang affiliated. And so what I found in that period of my life is there was leadership development, right? I went from being on the block to, hanging with some of the guys that were higher up. There was organizational development. Yep. I learned how to organize people, communicate, right? You learned about, when you're doing grassroots community organizing, language is a huge thing. And getting people to understand a common language in order to create a common vision. Well, no organization in the country has a better common language than gang culture, right? And so there's a common language, there's a common way of being, a common way of acting. So I learned a lot of organizational skills at that time in my life, and didn't realize it until I was trained and actually started building organizations.
Yeah, and then so there was growth happening for you while you were in this space, but then this other thing happened when you went to Erie, was someone reached in and pulled you out of the mental headspace that you were in into another headspace, right? Like, and so in academia they call those a disruptor. A person disrupted, so your trajectory was going kind of like this, and this person disrupted you, and now you are a national disruptor, right? Like, and so that was a thing that happened, and so I think there's people that might be listening that are saying, well, listen, Evans is clearly a much more dynamic person than I am. Where do I start, right? Like, if I am just really trying to get into this space of being better at care-based leadership, right? Which is because you clearly are a leader and you care about people in that space. Where does someone start? Like, when you're interacting with people, is it around the idea of common language? Is it around the idea of, like, when you're on a team, you're not, you said you're not, I think it's, you're not an individual, you need a team. I forgot what the quote was when you were in high school, but what's the starting point for you as you're connecting this, as you're out in the community helping people grow into this growth space?
So there's an African term called Ubunto, and that is a sense of community. And Ubuntu essentially means without you there is no me, and without me there is no you.
Right.
And so there's this natural universal connection that we all have one to another. And so what I try to find is common ground with everyone. Where's the intersection? Where do we intersect? You and I intersect in several places. We're both black men. Yep. We're both fathers. Yep. We're both husbands. We're both into leadership development. And so you look for those intersections in how you connect with people. And so I'm constantly on a hunt to do that and to figure out, as a human being, how do I connect to this other person? Really easy to look at the differences, right? Because we can see those right away.
Right.
But it's much more of an intentional act to say, how do I connect to this individual, and actually be intentional about sitting down with people and really getting to know that person.
Do you have any best practices that you've picked up over the years? So one of the things I love about your trajectory is that you're always with the people, like you're always in the mix. And so you've, by default, picked up some skill sets that some people just haven't had the chance to practice. What are some things that you found to be as a best practice when it comes to connecting with people, building that relationship?
My number one asset is listening.
Okay.
Just listening to people. You'd be surprised at what you hear. First of all, people are just wonderful, right? You see, from my perspective as a man of faith, I get to see God's handiwork in people every day. I get to see, folks like a Terry Minor Spencer, who was a drug addict and who did 16-year fed time, who is now running a nonprofit organization on the West End and helping other women run for office and helping people run for office in the region and becoming a force on her own. I get to see those kinds of stories. I get to see, a Tylee Thompson who, did time and who is now a reentry expert in our area. I get to see people who, Antoinette Osai, who has a son doing life without the possibility of parole, who didn't talk about her son for 20 years, but she's now out on the forefront, calling for change, calling for legislative action to end life without parole in Pennsylvania. And so you see these dynamic occurrences in people's life, and you get to see God's handiwork. And so, being the youngest of 8 kids, I've always been nosy, as we say in Pittsburgh, or nebby,
right.
as we say in Pittsburgh. I've always been nebby. And so I'm just curious about people. And I would say the best thing that you can do is have a ravenous or rabid curiosity about people. Yeah. Never assume, right? Always be willing to ask, how did this person arrive at where they are now?
Evans, man, you are one of the most inspirational people that I've had a chance to meet, so thanks for being on the show. I hope we can have you come back and just talk some more, just kind of dive into some of your theories and things. Before I let you go, I want folks to get to know a little bit about you. What do you like to do for fun?
Oh, man, what do I like to do for fun? So I have 5 children.
Okay.
I have a host of nieces and nephews. Me and my wife are usually, we usually have somebody's kid at a park, or we've got a house full of kids running around. But outside of that, just like to travel, spend time with my wife, and, hit the gym, work out. Love to swim, things of that nature. So
you breaking stereotypes, man?
I
just trying to tread water.
I was on the swim team. I got diving trophies and everything. I am a unicorn.
That's awesome, man. If people wanted to find you, are you on social media anywhere, or how can they stay in contact with you?
I am EvansMoore on Facebook, and I am Evans D. Moore Jr. on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evans, for being on the show. We appreciate you, man. And more importantly, I appreciate what you're doing in the community, how you're living leadership and caring for people in a real, genuine way. So thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Appreciate the work you're doing, too.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you for being a part of the show, The Paul Spradley Show. If you like what you're hearing, don't forget to share this with your friends. Comment, and share this. It's on social media, it's on podcasts and YouTube and all those other places, so that's a lot of fun. One of the things that we're interested in is making sure that you are having the opportunity to grow as well too. So if you are interested in a free consultation, go ahead and email me at pspradley@thecblc.net. I'd be happy to sit down and talk with you about how we can infuse care-based leadership in your organization or with you personally. We also do personal coaching. So thanks to my guest, Evans Moore, for the work that he's doing in the community. Keep being awesome, keep growing, and until next time, keep caring.